Well, 2 years ago today, well actually yesterday, I received my Nuffield scholarship. If someone had said to me at that point that last week I would have been putting a uterine prolapse back in a cow and getting paid for it, or that I was running a busy veterinary practice, I would have thought, even for me, whose motto is go hard or go home, that was a bit of a stretch. I've got to acknowledge a few people, and the support firstly must go to Meat and Livestock Australia. They're my investor. I'm pleased to report that for the first 12 months I felt a little like I may have sold my soul to Meat and Livestock Australia with the industry engagements, including Target 100 in Sydney, which was a major event only weeks after I came to Nuffield. I would also like to thank my sons, Tom and Jack, who have been running around here in the last couple of days with little ties on. They don't get the most conventional mother. I'm rarely the tuck shop mum. I rarely do the bus run either. And I have some pretty unconventional cleaning methods. But I do hope that their association with Nuffield through me will nurture and shape the future and their future. I'd also like to thank my parents, Ross and Kay Vanderhave. They're in the other room at the moment, but they were here yesterday watching me, and they have supported me throughout my agricultural career, and none so less than in the last 2 years. And regardless of what I do, whether they think I'm heading in the wrong direction or I bite off a little more than I can chew, they're always there to come to my aid, and I'm very, very grateful for that. To my husband Darcy, he's made a lot of sacrifices to get me here. He's made a lot of school lunches, he's ran the business through one of the worst droughts of our career, and he continues to support me, even though I'm walking out the door more than I'm walking in. I'm gonna go the right way. So, accelerating genetic progression in the North Australian beef herd. Well, I didn't really find that elusive silver bullet, and I thought honestly that I would. I'd like to share with you what I briefly did find in my international travels. So first of all, Ontario, Canada, and that's my first initiation in how Nuffield works. At a CSC, a fellow Canadian scholar, Blake Vince, says to one of the Canadian sponsors at the dinner, "Hey, you've got to meet this top Aussie chick, she's fantastic." He had just been to our farm and we had shared with him what we do in Australia. Little did I know that he had literally just met these people seconds earlier. However, we hit it off, and that's how I met Jim Snyder. Jim took a week, or more than a week, out of his busy schedule and showed me around Ontario, Canada, and some terrific contacts. I must add that through Jim, I had a fantastic lunch with the President of Farm Credit Canada discussing how we can get more young farmers into agriculture and the alternate ways of funding. He also took me on a really interesting tour through CEMEX headquarters, where they process about 500 bulls every day taking their semen. That was a really big light bulb moment for me, because I could see that Australia has some of the best genetics in the world, and not just in cattle, and CEMEX is mostly dairy, but also in sheep, and beef and dairy, and yet we don't export hardly any genetic material in comparison to other places. One of the most interesting days in Canada was spending a day with an embryologist, Dr. Everett Hall. He showed me his most recent farm project. It was a mice farm, complete from breeding through to fattening and selling to the pet and zoo trade. It even had its own processing plant. The Canadian dairy industry has embraced reproductive technology like no other in the bovine world, with extensive work in genomics having been completed. They can virtually genotype a fetus in the womb. Some of the bulls that I saw at CEMEX had their entire life's production of semen already sold, even though they were not old enough to produce a drop. So how far can we go? What can we achieve? Well, that brings me to South Dakota in the USA and the Blair brothers, who run an Angus herd commercially. In the early 90s, they started using artificial insemination as a way of reducing calving intervals and improving genetics cheaply. As of last year, they had not purchased a sire outright for about 15 years. They AI all their cows at least once, using estrus detection. More recently, they've utilised fixed-time AI to decrease the time it takes them to manage their herd as it's getting larger. Well over 80% are in calf on their first insemination, so they have a very tight 3-week calving interval. Most of us can only dream of that. They sell more than 400 highly sought-after commercial Angus bulls. Upon visiting their place and talking with both of the brothers, their biggest challenge is managing nutrition and body condition in their breeder herd. And when talking about artificial insemination and conception rates, that was the biggest factor that they put down to their success. Argentina. Well, I brushed up on my Española, which was pretty rusty to start with anyway, and headed to Argentina. Discovered and fell in love with the local barbecue-style parrilla and went in search of a Dr. Gabriel Bow, a veterinarian leading the world in assisted reproduction technology, in particular in Bos Indicus breeds and other tropically adapted breeds, which are a little more sensitive to the drugs and the regime in comparison to Bos Taurus cattle. We discussed, of all things again, nutrition and its fundamental importance in the reproductive system. The body is pre-programmed from millions of years of evolution to survive first. Once nutrition levels are met, and for survival and maintenance, then the body shifts to reproduction as its second function. In other words, don't fight nature. From listening to Gabriel and seeing what he was doing and what his latest trials were, I've decided to have a few trials of my own on my property this year. First of all, with my cows that I'll be inseminating, I will be trying a temporary weaning, which I wean the calves for 48 hours between the second and third muster, which with fixed time AI is when I pull my progesterone releasing device out and I wait the 56 hours until insemination. In Argentina, it worked well and they got up to a 20% increase in conception rates. Now, there are some issues with doing that in Northern Australia in terms of animal welfare and care of the calf and making sure that mismothering doesn't occur when you're putting them back in. So we do have to look at that very carefully. In his trials, and they're on large numbers, he didn't see any significant difference after 2 weeks in terms of weight of the weaners. They caught up very quickly, and he had protocols in place to make sure mismothering didn't occur. The other thing that I'll be doing, as at the moment I currently artificial inseminate my heifers once, and then we put in bulls about 2 weeks after, and we have a 50 to 60 day mating interval. There's huge economic benefits to decrease that mating interval and really push the boundaries of that. So one thing that he's doing in Argentina is he's resyncing those heifers 3 times and using ultrasound to detect early pregnancies. And he's also proven that progesterone devices don't affect a pregnancy, so we can put them in prior to knowing whether they're pregnant. This will give me a window of or mating interval of about 42 days. That's very, very good. And if you look at the economics of it, it works well in Argentina, and I think even in Australia it will work quite well. Certainly the economics that has just been released by Meat and Livestock Australia last year with work by Dr. Sophia Edwards does show that the economic benefit of fixed time AI is about 4-fold in comparison to using bulls and mating naturally. So this is pushing the boundary a little bit more, but I think it can still work. Again, I haven't tried this at home, so I'm always reluctant to give advice and recommendations to other farmers until I've actually tried it. So across the Rio de Silva to Uruguay, having also spent some time in Argentina, Patagonia, looking at sheep production with fellow scholar Matthew Ibsen, I was now very fluent in Spanish sheep terminology, and it was very good at miming to try and get the message through. What does sheep production or reproduction have to do with cattle reproduction? Well, surprisingly or not, a lot. The sheep guys are really good at managing their nutrition in terms of their fertility, and they know that by looking after their twinning lambs and they're going to get a much better reproductive rate. That brought me back to nutrition again and a resolve to go back to look at what we're doing and manage nutrition much better. And I think generally in Northern Australia, we don't do a good job of managing nutrition and body condition. In terms of Northern Australia, my recommendations are that, first of all, most people should really look for a return on investment. They should be looking at infrastructure first rather than looking at trying genetics. So things like increasing watering points, like what Don McGeecke was talking about this morning, telemetry, systems, legumes and pastures, that's going to give you a lot better return on investment. I'm reluctant to see the point in improving genetics when nutrition's then going to be a limiting factor. However, in the event that you've got all those things in place, then I think we really need to look at genetics as the next place to go to improve production. The other thing that I looked at in South America, and they had a big problem with predation, and at that point it was foxes, and they also had there was a mountain cat. The name's just gone blank. And so they were using various methods to try and combat those losses. We have a similar problem in terms of Northern Australia, where we have losses from conception to weaning of between 2 and 20%, and I would say that most people are in over 10% would be better than the average producer. So there's a huge area that we can actually improve there, and I think there's a lot to look at that. So what we're doing is we're actually trying Marama dogs as guardians in our herd. We've just got 2. We're the only ones in the district, as usual. And we'll get a few more and we'll monitor and trial those. I'd actually like to try and do some research on how they work and what sort of, whether we've got to have males and females together and do they actually work. But if we could reduce the predicted 5% loss from wild dogs that we currently think we've got, that would be a significant benefit. So in Northern Australia, manage disease, mortality rates first. We can get a big jump out of looking at bull fertility, which most people still aren't, and body condition and nutrition. These all need to be addressed first. That'll allow us to have a higher weaning rate, which will also mean we can have higher selection pressure on our females. So I guess, although I did look at a lot of fixed time AI and embryo transfer, my real message for Australia coming back here is we can do a lot better with what we've already got, and there's some low-hanging fruit there that we're not even getting close to. So, opportunities. Well, I'm always looking for opportunities, and I did discover a raft of things that I think Australian agriculture should be looking at into the future, and I'll just give you one example, and that's the scope for Australian genetics to be exported overseas. We have genetics that are some of the best in the world. We can definitely compete overseas, and we are working on genomics and estimated breeding values to prove that. We're bred in harsh, hot conditions and environments that are very difficult, and that's not that different from South America and places in Africa and even north into Turkey. Australian genetics are not promoted at all, and that's something we're really missing out on. It is difficult. The protocols to get Australian genetic material out of the country is somewhat hampered by red tape. There are people doing it in small quantities, so you can manoeuvre your way through. And I think that's something that we have to look at more closely. I also see a huge opportunity on the domestic front. Most people will tell me they don't do fixed time AI because they haven't got the labour. And I'd just like to make the point that in Argentina and Uruguay, where I went, they did have up to 25% unemployment rates. However, every farmer I talked to still had problems, same problems as us getting labour, and in particular skilled labour. There was gauchos in abundance, that's no doubt, but 5 of their gauchos would do the same as what we would expect one jackaroo to do here in Australia. So I don't think that the labour situation is reality. I think we've got a perception that labour is tight, and it definitely is, but that's not a valid reason anymore not to do it. So on a domestic basis, we've got some of the reproductive technologies already available, and there are services around that already do that, but not on the large scale that we need. So we do need to skill up. It's economically viable to do both IVF, embryo transfer and fixed time AI under Australian conditions. So that's where I'm headed, having recently set up a company that will eventually do both. Nuffield has taken me from thinking outside the box to knowing there is no box. It's been a melting pot of ideas and innovation, and my head's been buzzing for the last 2 years. I have so many things that agriculture in Australia can implement that I don't know when I'm going to get the time to do them all. I've seen some amazing farmers around the world doing extraordinary things. My name is Kara Knudsen and I am a Nuffield Scholar.